people actually truly believe, and it hasn't, it's all alleged still, but that this large amount of money that keeps going to the Ukraine is being funneled. And so you've got now the MAGA devoted versus the reasonable, I like to call them the reasonable and rational Republicans, coming to head with this situation with NATO, because they're viewing government, and especially what they would consider globalist government, as corrupt and part of the problem. And so, you've got a group of people who truly believe that they're the victim, like Donald Trump, in so many different areas. And then the rest of us who are ready to move on, ready to breathe and say, knock it off.
Program Amy Tarkanian, who's a Republican strategist and a former Nevada state Republican Party chair. Hello to you, Amy, and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Hi. Well, Amy, you're hearing the conversation, what's going on in our minds here on this side of the Atlantic, and the implications of a win for the former President Donald Trump on American policy would obviously be huge in so many different ways. But let's focus for a moment on this question of Western security and NATO. How much do those considerations, Amy, feature in the mind of American voters? And I'm thinking of Republican Party voters who in the past have traditionally been the party which sees American security and Western security as one of its core missions.
Sure. Well, both Tim and Emma gave some very, very, I think, detailed, worries, and they are to be expected, I would think, at this point, because it's not just Donald Trump who is far in the lead and looking like he's going to be our nominee as every day passes, but also Governor Ron DeSantis. The two of them are pretty much on the same page, saying that this war in the Ukraine is not vital. And then Tim mentioned Vivek, who I also agree that he is terrifying and he is naive. And you saw Governor Nikki Haley on that same debate call him out on the fact that he does not know what he's talking about. And it is very scary.
He was absolutely fantastic in my view last week. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and I think Governor Nikki Haley won the debate, far above anyone else. But the fact of the matter is, we are dealing with two different campaigns. You've got the primary voters and you've got the general voters. And right now, the primary voters are all leaning towards this exhaustion of giving more funding to the Ukraine without having any audits, without knowing, where is the money exactly going, because it's being combined with the unfortunate situation of the Biden family being this crime-ridden, group of individuals who are funneling money in their own pockets. And so you have people actually thinking that a lot of this money isn't being spent properly, and that's the concern. And so now you've got people who are all or nothing for the Ukraine war, which is also, I think, terrifying in itself, because we are seeing, and we do know that people are being murdered, raped, kidnapped, and Russia is at fault. But you have people calling conspiracy and want to pull out altogether. But you do fortunately have candidates like Chris Christie, like Governor Nikki Haley, who are in favor of continuing this war in Ukraine until we do win. But when you have Republicans throwing out red meat and saying that either you're an isolationist or you're a globalist, like it's a bad thing to make sure that you're watching out for other individuals, we're in a very dire situation here, and I don't see a win-win for it.
Just to go back to a point I made a little earlier on, we know there's a possibility, to put it at its least, that Donald Trump, if he's elected, which is perfectly possible, would wish to withdraw from NATO. How does that play with Republican supporters? We know the MAGA, the Make America Great Again, core support for Donald Trump, I guess, either don't notice or don't care very much. What about more mainstream Republicans, and what about the rest of America?
Well, I think that more mainstream Republicans and those who he would need to sway over, being the independents and soft Democrats. I think the majority agree that we do need to continue in this fight with Ukraine. And the fact that we are in NATO, it is viewed as a powerful group to be a part of. And I mean, we're seeing other, smaller countries like Finland, who are now increasing their amount, from their GDP to go in towards NATO. This is something that I think should be taken seriously. You can't just say, "Oh, we're going to pull out," because if the U.S. pulls out, like was mentioned earlier, like Emma said, you're now looking then at a number of smaller countries who really have depended upon the U.S.'s assistance. And they're going to be left hanging to dry,
yes,
which I think is a major concern.
Before Amy, before I bring
the president.
Before I bring Tim and Amy back into this, that we know an American president has enormous power over the treaty relationships of the United States with other parts of the world. Would it happen? Do you believe he has the power? I think to do it, he'd have the opposition, no doubt, of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff and a large part of the Washington establishment. Would he get away with it? Do you think he could do it if he was President Donald Trump?
Well, never say never in the world of politics. But, once again, when he was first president, he talked about draining the swamp, and all he did was surround himself with grifters and morons. So I don't know if he's going to be able to pull something like that off. I don't know if the powers that be and those who have a more level head will actually allow him to be able to do something like that. I don't know if he could actually do that unilaterally. I don't believe that he could. And I think you would probably have cooler heads prevail in trying to intervene, I would hope. I think, unfortunately, it's rhetoric and conspiracy theorists. And just like I had mentioned earlier, the fact that it's being combined with other unfortunate situations, such as, President Biden and his family's dealings overseas with Burisma. Also in the past that, Hunter Biden was also on the board for Burisma. And so people actually truly believe, and it hasn't, it's all alleged still, but that this large amount of money that keeps going to the Ukraine is being funneled. And so you've got now the MAGA devoted versus the reasonable, I like to call them, the reasonable and rational Republicans, coming to head with this situation with NATO, because they're viewing government, and especially what they would consider globalist government, as corrupt and part of the problem. And so, you've got a group of people who truly believe that they're the victim, like Donald Trump, in so many different areas. And then the rest of us who are ready to move on, ready to breathe and say, knock it off.
Tim Montgomery, what are you thinking?
Well, I just want to slightly defend the Republican Party versus the Democrats. And I've really enjoyed Amy's candor. So this might be a softball question for you, Amy. But let's not sort of let the Democrats off the hook here either, and just, think that this is Republicans bad for foreign policy, Democrats good. I would say there's a direct line between Biden's abandonment of Afghanistan 2 years ago and Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. He didn't think the West, America, was interested in bearing any burden anymore. One thing Donald Trump did do was really invest in the armed forces. That's the American armed forces after quite a few years of neglect under Barack Obama. And there are people like Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate, who thinks that his last, perhaps most important job in American politics, is an aging gentleman, is to ensure that the American Republican Party stays solid. So it isn't just, and partly why I go back to my fundamental point, is that we need to take our responsibilities more seriously. It's not just the Republicans that we need to worry about. There's plenty to worry about in the Democrats' attitude to foreign policy as well.
Yeah. Amy, what are you thinking?
Yes, no, 100%. You are correct on that. And I think that's also another issue that you see on the Republican side, where they feel that it's not being treated fairly. When you see Republican problems versus Democrat problems, we only hear about the Republican problems, and it seems that the DOJ is hyper focused on everything that's Republican, where you see the Democrats kind of just be swept under the rug and you hear about it for maybe a split second. And so that's also caused a lot of controversy amongst Republicans as well, in making sure that government is being ran, honest and fair, which we're finding that that's not necessarily the case. It's not fair for all folks across the board. And yes, I would agree. It is unfortunate because you can even talk about the situation where, was the election stolen? Was the election not stolen? Hillary Clinton said her election was stolen. Stacey Abrams, who ran for governor of Georgia, said the election was stolen. Now Donald Trump saying his election is stolen. Now they all have, their own bit of different details in how they went about it. But it sure seems, even though I think Donald Trump, in my personal opinion, did some incorrect and maybe some unlawful actions in his display, but it seems like they are coming after him harder than any of the others who claimed that their election was stolen. And so you can pick almost any issue at this point, and it's so hyper polarized on either side that it just seems like you might as well throw your hands up at this point, because how are you going to get anything accomplished?
Yeah, well, I mean, hyper polarized is about right. Amy, it's always great to get your take on these things. Let's hope we can keep in touch and talk again before very long. That's Amy Tarkanian, the Republican former chair of the Nevada State GOP.